Welcome to Wandering Scribe. This is a recap of my House of Horrors. Disclaimer. All rights belong to the original authors and publishers. Only the narration and production are my own. Enjoy the story. Chapter 21. The third floor of Ping An Apartments bore the scars of an old tragedy. Mold clung to the walls, and a foul stench hung thick in the air. Chen Ge stepped cautiously into a small, decrepit room. Though the windows were barred and new planks covered them, the space was bare, just lingering decay and silence. He moved down the corridor, sifting through piles of trash. Among the debris, something caught his eye: 4 old rag dolls. Despite the fire that had ravaged the floor, they remained oddly intact. As a former toy designer, Chen Ge recognized the dolls as vintage, all from the same manufacturer. That, along with their careful placement, made one thing clear: someone had intentionally preserved them. Curious, he tore one open. Nestled among the stuffing was a love letter. Cheesy, clumsy words of affection, likely from someone too shy to speak them aloud. But when he opened the last doll, everything shifted. Its cotton was filled not with a note of love, but with shredded paper reading, "Go to hell." Affection had curdled into hatred. Something had gone terribly wrong. Before he could dig deeper, the hallway light suddenly flicked on. Chen Ge froze. Footsteps echoed on the stairs, followed by hushed voices. He ducked into a nearby room, pressing himself behind the door. Through a narrow crack, he watched. The landlord and the strange woman from the first floor climbed the steps, carrying an old oil lamp. Their conversation was chilling. They spoke of something that needed to be moved, buried. Others soon followed: the tattooed man, the heavy-set tenant, each of them cloaked in black, armed with tools. Arguments broke out. One hesitated, speaking of calling the authorities. But fear kept them bound together. They were hiding more than secrets. Led to the end of the hallway, they pushed aside trash and unveiled a hidden wall. Cement, fortified, unnatural. And then, in the flickering lamplight, something emerged from the concrete. A body. Partially entombed in the wall, turned away from them, motionless. It was the preserved remains of a woman. From his hiding place, Chen Ge felt a chill crawl up his spine. This wasn't just a haunted apartment. It was a tomb built on guilt, secrets, and something far darker than he had imagined. The past hadn't just lingered here, it had festered. And now, it was being unearthed. Chapter 22. The stillness of the night was suffocating. Chen Ge crouched behind a door, barely breathing. Just a few steps away, several tenants worked silently, prying open a wall on the third floor. Bit by bit, they revealed what had long been hidden: a lifeless body, entombed in concrete. Sweat dripped down their faces, not just from the effort, but from the weight of what they were uncovering. These were not trained criminals, just desperate people tangled in secrets too heavy to bear. Once the body was pulled free, they sealed it in a sack. Whispered arguments followed. None of them wanted to stay behind, afraid of what might happen in the dark. As they left one by one, silence returned, until it was deafening. Only then did Chen Ge dare to move. But something gnawed at him: he wasn't just witnessing a crime. He was trapped inside it. He crept down to the first floor. The door was locked. The windows were barred. His only chance was on the second floor. He climbed the stairs again, heart pounding, footsteps light as whispers. His room was at the far end of the corridor. As he reached for the door, something stopped him cold. The hair he'd left in the keyhole was gone. Someone had entered his room. They knew he wasn't there. Panic bloomed, sharp and cold. He stepped back, forcing his mind to stay sharp. If he entered, he'd walk straight into their hands. He backed into the shadows, moving toward the corridor's far end. There was only one chance to survive. Gripping the mallet he carried, he raised it high and slammed it into the lock of a nearby door. The crash shattered the silence. From behind, the door to his room burst open. The landlord and tattooed man stormed out, wielding tools turned into weapons. They charged at him, rage written across their faces. Chen Ge didn't look back. The lock cracked, and with a powerful kick, he threw open the door and disappeared into the dark room beyond, his only hope against the nightmare chasing him down the hall. Chapter 23. Chen Ge burst through the door and sprinted for the window. The drop was steep, 3 or 4 meters, but footsteps thundered behind him. He had no choice. He leapt. Metal netting scraped his limbs as he slid down the wall. Hitting the ground hard, he rolled, grabbed his mallet, and ran. Shouts erupted behind him. The landlord, cleaver in hand, hurled it toward him. It landed just inches away. From the front door, more figures emerged, the others, holding hedge clippers, chasing like predators through the night. Chen Ge scaled the rusted gate and vanished into the dense forest. No lights. No paths. Only tangled branches and the occasional flash of a beam slicing through the dark as the angry voices pursued him. For 15 minutes, he ran. Branches tore at his clothes. Mud clung to his legs. Eventually, the voices faded. Hidden in a bush, he gasped for breath, trembling with the knowledge, if he had hesitated for even a moment, he would not have made it. But safety was an illusion. A faint crunch echoed behind him. Chen Ge froze. A flashlight flickered through the trees. It was Wang Qi, the man who had supposedly left the apartment long ago. What was he doing here, in the dead of night? Chen Ge didn't wait to find out. He backed away, deeper into the trees, eventually emerging near a small wooden cabin tucked at the forest's edge. A sign warned against fires and littering, clearly a ranger's outpost. Inside, it was dark and cluttered. A sharp odor lingered. Using the faint glow of his phone, Chen Ge found the source. Beneath a wooden bed, moldy women's clothes were piled, all appearing recently worn. Each piece matched the size of the female body found inside the apartment wall. Among the clothes, he found scraps of paper, confessions of love, written in handwriting eerily similar to the notes hidden in the old dolls. But the dolls were from 5 years ago. These clothes, these notes, were recent. His thoughts raced. Was it possible the same person was behind both? As he lifted a jacket, something tumbled from the pocket, a phone in a pink case. The screen was on. A message was being typed. 2 words, "Save me." Chen Ge's blood turned cold. He checked the message history. It was all the same. Again and again, "Save me." Was the woman in the wall truly gone? Or was someone else, still out there, crying for help? Chapter 24. The air in the wooden house was heavy with rot and secrets. Chen Ge scrolled through the phone he found, every message sent at midnight, everyone crying, "Save me." But the woman who owned this phone had been sealed in a wall for years. Cold realization set in. These weren't cries from the beyond, they were the work of the killer himself. Everything pointed to Wang Qi, the man painted as broken and harmless. But he wasn't just lingering around the apartment. He lived here, in this forest shack, surrounded by the belongings of the woman he claimed to mourn. Her mold-covered clothes. Her phone. Her final words, repeated nightly. Chen Ge pieced it together. Wang Qi had preserved her memory with a twisted devotion, messaging himself with her voice, keeping her spirit alive through delusion or guilt, or both. Just as the puzzle clicked into place, Chen Ge sensed movement behind him. He turned, and there stood Wang Qi, axe in hand, eyes wild and bloodshot. Silence stretched between them like a fraying thread. Then came the voice, no longer grieving, but cold, frayed by madness. Wang Qi confessed with a calm that sent chills down Chen Ge's spine. He'd sealed her in the wall himself. Not out of rage, but to keep her from leaving. He didn't mean to. At least, that's what he told himself. The axe swayed in his hand as he spoke of betrayal, of voices, of how everyone hated him. But Chen Ge knew there was no excuse. This was a man fractured beyond return. A murderer who'd hidden behind sorrow. In a flash of resolve, Chen Ge lunged, mallet raised. The impact rang through bone and wood. Blood slicked his grip. He didn't stop. A kick, a shove, and he was out the door, into the dark. Branches clawed at him as he tore through the forest. Behind him, footsteps, frenzied, relentless. Only when the trees thinned and concrete touched his feet did the nightmare begin to fade. Then, distant sirens. Headlights pierced the black. Chen Ge stood trembling in the road, raising his arms high. He wasn't just a survivor. He was the one who unmasked the killer from 4 years ago. Chapter 25. The cold room still echoed the events from earlier that night. On the table lay a half-eaten bun, a bottle of water, and scattered cotton swabs, traces of an ongoing investigation. Chen Ge sat quietly, guarded on all sides, as officers questioned him about the strange apartment incident. Through photos and records, they identified 2 of the suspicious tenants. One was Zhang Peng, a gambler with a peony tattoo, known for fleeing debts and committing thefts. The other, a man named Feng Chunlei, was wanted for a hit-and-run and reckless driving. Both had slipped into the shadows before. Chen Ge recounted what happened, and soon a special investigation team arrived. While one group rushed to the apartments surrounding woods, another followed Chen Ge back to the wooden house. There, only a pool of fresh blood remained. Wang Qi had vanished. But what they saw inside, clothing, personal items, and stains, was enough to convince them. They sealed off the entire mountain, launching a manhunt. Despite the danger, Chen Ge refused to leave. He insisted there was still evidence inside the haunted Pingan apartments. And so, under heavy protection, he remained in the same room where so many secrets had unraveled. At 3 a.m., a familiar face entered. Inspector Li, the officer who once handled his parents' disappearance, came bearing news. Wang Qi had been captured. The other tenants were also in custody, except Zhang Peng, who remained at large. The mystery of the past had started to unravel. Wang Qi's fiancé's remains had been found. Each tenant had their own sins. The woman turned out to be Zhang Peng's wife, likely guilty of hiding him. The landlord, originally a caretaker, had become greedy, scheming to steal property from the elderly tenants. Though cruel, physical signs of mistreatment were minimal. As the officers cleared the area, Chen Ge stayed behind. He waited until the first light pierced through the broken windows and his black phone chimed. Mission completed. He had survived the night. More than that, he had uncovered a grim truth buried for years. A new scenario called Murder by Midnight was now unlocked on his mysterious phone, one he could manipulate freely, just like a director behind the scenes of a twisted stage. The reward wasn't just monetary. Among the items he received was something far more disturbing: Wang Qi's missing person notice. A haunting item steeped in regret and obsession. Every day I search for the love I killed, it read. Sealed in the wall, but she always finds her way back to me. As the police car carried him away from Pingan Apartments, Chen Ge stared at the screen of his phone. He wasn't tired. He wasn't afraid. Chapter 26. The mission was complete, over 90% success. And with it came a strange reward: Wang Qi's missing person notice. But Chen Ge didn't feel rewarded. The description read more like a curse, a chilling confession of a man haunted by the one he had wronged, claiming her memory returned each day despite his efforts to hide her. Tired and hollow-eyed, Chen Ge arrived back at New Century Park around sunrise. He dragged himself to the haunted house's staff room, collapsed onto the bed, and only then noticed his phone had died. Plugging it in, the screen flickered to life. Despite the chaos of the previous night, his live stream had drawn attention. Thousands of new followers. Dozens of messages asking if he had survived. Among them was a call from He-san, ecstatic that Chen Ge had lived, mainly because he'd won a bet with his classmates who were convinced Chen Ge wouldn't make it through the night. Still, Chen Ge was touched. In some twisted way, his near-death ordeal had brought him recognition. Exhausted, he buried himself under the covers and drifted into sleep. But peace didn't last long. But rest was short-lived. The door slammed open as morning light seeped into the room. Heavy footsteps raced up the stairs, and the bed shuddered violently. Jolted awake, Chen Ge found himself staring at Su-won, who carried a phone screen glowing with urgency. There, on the morning news, was a blurred image of him being escorted by police. The news anchor praised an anonymous citizen, him, for aiding in solving a cold case tied to a tragic fire 4 years ago. Though his face was pixelated, his clothes gave him away. After changing and calming down, Chen Ge gave Su-won a vague version of last night's horrors, framing it as a trip to find inspiration for the haunted house. She offered to let him rest, but the moment she mentioned there were visitors, his exhaustion vanished. More guests meant more eyes on the attraction, and more reason to explore his latest reward. Pulling out the black phone, Chen Ge activated the completed murder by midnight scenario. The phone warned him, haunted house space nearing capacity. Expansion required for new scenarios. But that didn't matter now. Racing to the 3rd floor, he opened the door. What met him was no longer a cluttered storage area, but a transformed, chilling hallway radiating an oppressive atmosphere. The new scenario wasn't just set up, it was sprawling, consuming space from all 3 floors. It mirrored Ping'an apartments with unnerving precision. Chen Ge stepped inside. His haunted house had grown, and so had the darkness within. Chapter 27. After surviving the nightmarish events at Ping'an apartments, Chen Ge stepped into the newly unlocked 3rd floor scenario of his haunted house. The setting was eerily familiar, its corridors and traps mirrored the real place of horror he had escaped from. Rooms connected through hidden doors, and shadows seemed to breathe along the walls. It was a place soaked in quiet dread. Though exhausted, he knew the visitors downstairs were waiting. By the time he opened the gates, a crowd had formed, drawn by the viral whispers surrounding his terrifying live stream. Questions flew, curiosity laced with disbelief. Had he really survived the horrors the black screen only hinted at? Chen Ge didn't indulge them. With calm professionalism, he began letting guests in, 20 RMB per ticket, no children allowed. The haunted house had become the park's most popular attraction, but the atmosphere outside was not without unease. Even Uncle Su, who had once seen the building as little more than a crumbling structure, was now torn between pride and deep concern. The path Chen Ge walked, though lucrative, felt dangerously dark. Behind the scenes, Chen Ge opened the black phone. It offered him 3 missions, each tied to the mechanics of fear. He rejected the most dangerous task, wary of the mysterious noises from the bathroom at midnight. Instead, he chose the more manageable normal mission, rearrange the scares to catch visitors off guard by subverting their expectations. He spent hours inside the Minghun scenario, adjusting props and reworking scare cues. While guests braced themselves for horrors in one direction, the true terror would strike from the opposite side. It was psychological misdirection, a trick of timing and perception. By afternoon, the mission was complete. The black phone buzzed with its reward, Dr. Skullcracker's uniform. A tattered outfit belonging to a former asylum worker who believed madness could only be cured by splitting skulls open. The story behind it sent a chill down Chen Ge's spine. He stored the costume and began sketching ideas to blend it into the murder by midnight set. His mind churned with twisted possibilities. But just as inspiration struck, his phone rang. It was He-san. Whispering nervously, he reminded Chen Ge of a warning. Upperclassmen from the university were coming. They hadn't forgotten the scare that left one of their own in tears. And now, they wanted revenge. Chen Ge glanced at the entrance. The next wave of guests wasn't just here for thrills. They came with a mission of their own. Chapter 28. Word of Chen Ge's haunted house had spread fast, some drawn by curiosity, others by his chilling online content. But this time, 7 students from Zhejiang Medical University had arrived with a purpose, to film a light-hearted prank video for their classmate, Senior Gao. Unknown to them, Chen Ge had prepared something far from humorous. With a sly grin, he welcomed them as perfect candidates for testing his newly upgraded scenario. Among the 7 was He-san, who had already experienced the horrors within. Traumatized, he had no intention of entering again. But Chen Ge's kindness was firm. He handed out tickets to all 7, insisting no one be left out. Embarrassed yet unwilling to offend, the group agreed. Before entering, the students gathered in quiet formation. With military-like precision, they reviewed the attraction's layout, studied in advance through online forums and He-san's notes. Confident, they believed they had every scare anticipated, every shadow mapped. But the moment they stepped inside, the illusion of control shattered. The haunted house was unnervingly cold, its darkness deeper than memory had served. A new table stood in the lobby, stacked with waiver forms. Chen Ge coolly mentioned the necessity. The first waiver was introduced after He-san had fainted from fear. Then, almost as an afterthought, he dropped a casual reference to a recent criminal case, the Ping'an apartment murders from 4 years ago, just recently reopened, and still unsolved. The students signed, their hands stiff from the cold, then followed him upstairs. Chen Ge opened the door to a new scenario, Murder by Midnight. Gone was the Sahyuan layout they had trained for. Instead, a warped corridor greeted them, narrow and maze-like, its walls blackened by soot. Deep claw marks lined the edges as if someone had tried desperately to escape. Half-open doors hinted at unseen eyes lurking just beyond the dark. The bravado drained from their faces. They turned to He-san, confused and betrayed. This wasn't what he'd described. Panic rippled quietly among them. One had spent the night training to lift a coffin lid in anticipation of a prop. Another had rehearsed scripted lines for comedic effect. None of it mattered now. This wasn't the attraction they expected. It was something colder, more real, its atmosphere soaked in unease. Chen Ge gave a final warning, no photography, and the only way out was to find the hidden exit within 20 minutes. If overwhelmed, they could surrender by calling into a camera. With that, the heavy door closed behind them. Inside, the students stepped forward, but the house seemed to shift around them. Every turn deeper drew them into something far more terrifying than they'd rehearsed for. What was once a prank had become a psychological trap, and Chen Ge watched from the shadows, knowing imagination would always be more terrifying than truth. Chapter 29. The heavy door clicked shut behind the 7 medical students, locking them inside the Murder by Midnight scenario. The sound echoed like a warning, sharp, final, and full of dread. Upstairs, Chen Ge moved swiftly through the props room. With quiet excitement, he prepared his most elaborate setup yet. He summoned Su-won, the actress who once played a ghost bride, and presented her new role, Dr. Skullcracker. She hesitated at the sight of her new costume, a tattered doctor's robe soaked in deep stains and weighted by iron chains etched with distorted faces. A chilling, skin-like mask completed the transformation. Reluctantly, she put it on. The moment the chains coiled around her and the mask touched her skin, something in her shifted. Kindness faded. Something darker took root. Chen Ge handed her a strange hammer. It looked like it had been carved from a human spine, with bloodletting needles set into its head. Though it was hollow, he instructed her to drag it for effect. With roles assigned, Su-won slipped into the 3rd-floor maze. Chen Ge, after some quick makeup, entered the scenario through a hidden passage, watching the visitors from the shadows. The black phone in his pocket granted him full control of the traps and ambience. The students wandered the dim corridors, nervously inspecting props and whispering strategies. Despite their prior research, the real layout bore no resemblance to what they'd expected. Cold air wrapped around them. Every creak of the floor seemed intentional. Some grew bold. They suggested splitting into teams to search faster. But He-san, pale and wary, urged caution. He'd seen too much. He knew the mind behind the house didn't follow reason. The others dismissed his warnings. Unseen in the dark, their hunters took position. The game was about to begin. Chapter 30. In the dim corridors of the murder by midnight scenario, tension began to fray. He-san tried to warn his group, something wasn't right, but his words were dismissed as fear. They had entered together, 7 university students, confident and skeptical. The haunted house was just a game to them, nothing more. The first rooms revealed nothing but dust and darkness. Jokes were exchanged, and footsteps echoed too freely. The background music shifted subtly, growing heavier, more invasive. Still, no one noticed, except He-san. As they split into groups, the unease thickened. From one of the rooms, a burnt, eyeless ragdoll was found, seated perfectly at its center. A zipper down its back revealed a disturbing discovery: strips of paper, each scrawled with the same haunting phrase, "All of you have to die." No one took it seriously. They laughed it off. Threw the doll aside. Then came another item, an old, crumpled diary page. A child's words described a hidden figure in the house, ignored by the adults too busy fearing the outside, when the real threat was already inside. He-san stood at the edge, feeling the pressure build. There was movement in the shadows. Chains rattled softly, then louder, trailing from the stairwell. They were no longer alone. But his seniors didn't listen. Intent on beating the game, they pressed deeper into the corridors, debating strategy. Then one of them decided to film their adventure, perhaps to mock the haunted house's creator. He lifted the phone, trying to capture the whole group. Then he froze. His face drained of color. The phone slipped from his trembling hand. "What's wrong?" the others asked. He couldn't speak, only stare. They picked up the phone. On the screen was the group, huddled together. But there weren't 7 figures. There were 8. Someone, or something, had joined them. Quietly. Without a sound. They hadn't noticed it enter. But it was already there. Watching. Waiting. And breathing among them. Chapter 31. The tension shattered like glass. One glance at the phone, and everything changed. There were 8 of them. In the dim corridor, no one spoke. The atmosphere grew heavy, suffocating. Suddenly, the clatter of chains echoed. Something was approaching. A towering figure emerged from the shadows. Drenched in crimson, wrapped in a blood-stained doctor's coat, it dragged chains across the floor. A hammer swung loosely from one hand, soaked with something dark. Its head tilted low, eyes hidden behind matted hair. But when the light from a phone caught its face, horror struck. The face was a grotesque patchwork of stitched skin, sewn together from different men. Then, chaos. The monster charged, chains crashing into the walls, hammer flailing. Screams erupted. Fear overtook logic. The students scattered, some fled upstairs, others dove into rooms or down stairwells. The group dissolved like smoke. Xiao Hui ran after a figure who moved ahead of her. In the spiral of panic, she didn't care who it was, only that she wasn't alone. They darted into a room on the first floor. A cupboard stood open. The man climbed in. With the chains growing louder behind her, she followed him inside, sealing the door behind them. Darkness swallowed her whole. Inside the confined space, silence pressed in. Her only comfort was the presence beside her. She peered through the slats, heart pounding. The monster entered, dragging its chains, scanning the room. A knock on the door, a heartbeat skipped, but then it left. Relief surged. She turned to the figure next to her. But no words came. No response. She reached for her phone, turned on the light, and faced him. The figure had a blank, unfamiliar face, not a friend. Not anyone she knew. Her phone slipped. A silent beat. Then, a scream tore through the cupboard. She scrambled backward, panic overtaking her. Her head struck the wall, and her body collapsed. Whether from fear or injury, her consciousness faded. Chen Ge pushed the cupboard door open, retrieved her phone, and silently carried her away through a staff passage. 1 down. 6 remained. The game had only just begun. Chapter 32. Monkey, one of the medical students who had entered the haunted house with his classmates, was known among his peers for his sharp mind and anxious heart. Though brilliant in class, he was the type who never dared enter the morgue alone. Now, stranded on the second floor, he kept himself pressed to a corner near the staircase, his only escape route. The lights dimmed further. Uneasy music crept through the halls, stirring his nerves. Monkey recounted the earlier chaos. The appearance of the monster had felt too perfectly timed, just as someone mentioned an eighth person in their group. He realized then, the goal had never been to attack directly, but to fracture them mentally, isolate them, pick them off one by one. But understanding a trick doesn't make it any less terrifying. When Monkey reached for his phone to call for help, his screen reflected something behind him, a ragdoll. It had been on the third floor earlier. Now it sat motionless at the base of the stairs. He didn't dare use his flashlight. The monster might still be lurking. Turning his phone toward the wall, he confirmed it. There was the doll. Ragged, stuffed with paper, and eerily still. Yet as he stared into its glassy eyes, he swore he saw emotion, guilt, sadness, pleading. His imagination, surely. He dialed brother phone, but the ringtone echoed from the third floor. Monkey crept up the stairs. In the corridor above, Brother Feng's phone lay abandoned, screen glowing faintly. Doors swayed from the draft. The haunted house felt colder with every step. Then, Monkey's phone vibrated. A classmate, Ling, was calling. She was trapped, somewhere on this floor, terrified. And in the room with her, were two dolls, sitting side by side. The mention of dolls sent chills through him. He forced himself to move forward, trying to locate her by the sound of her voice. Then he stopped. Another doll blocked his path. It was different. Older looking. Long-haired. And again, that strange feeling, like it was watching him. Monkey told himself it was just a trick of fear. To prove it, he turned around. And froze. There, behind him, another doll, lying in the very spot where he had just stood. It hadn't made a sound. It hadn't moved in any way he could see. But it was there. And it was closer. Chapter 33. Monkey, a bright yet timid medical student, found himself at his breaking point. Alone on the third floor, he was pursued not by footsteps, but by silence, and ragdolls that always seemed to be closer than before. Breathing ragged, legs trembling, he watched as one of the dolls crept near, its burned face upturned, expression warped, almost smiling. Fear overtook him. A cramp in his leg sent him collapsing to the floor. Desperate, he cried out into the dark, unsure what scared him more, the pain or the thought that no one might answer. But someone did. Chen Ge, the haunted house's owner, had heard his scream and rushed to his side. Though calm on the surface, even he was puzzled by the fear that had unraveled the young man. Two ragdolls lay nearby, motionless yet charged with presence. Monkey, voice hoarse, begged not just for himself, but for Ling, still trapped in one of the rooms. They found her cowering in the corner, her eyes locked on two larger dolls at the center of the room. To her, they had been watching her, following her with their eyes. The dolls were handcrafted, their details crude but meaningful. One wore an apron, the other a sewn-on beard, symbols of a mother and father. Chen Ge placed the two smaller dolls beside them. 4 in total. A family. And a match. The scenario, Murder by Midnight, had always drawn inspiration from the arson tragedy at Ping An Apartments. Could these dolls represent the victims? The idea took root, and then confirmation came. The black phone in Chen Ge's pocket buzzed, a hidden mission was triggered. The spirits, it said, had unfinished business. Help them, and they would become allies. Cradling this discovery, Chen Ge guided Monkey and Ling to safety. But he did not leave. Instead, he retrieved a missing person notice linked to the arson suspect, an object that might serve the spirit's purpose. Returning to the room, Chen Ge found something unexpected. The father, mother, and elder sister dolls lay flat, but the smallest doll was face down near the doorway, as if she had been trying to flee. It was still, but it didn't feel lifeless. He picked it up, sensing something strange yet gentle. The doll felt like it was hiding, playing dead. And somehow, that made it less frightening, and almost endearing. Closing the door behind him, Chen Ge sat down among them. If these spirits wanted to talk, he was ready to listen. Chapter 34. Alone in a dark, silent room, Chen Ge sat before 4 weathered dolls. Each one symbolized a victim of a long-past tragedy, the arson at Fuan Apartments. Though lifeless, their presence felt chillingly aware. He spoke gently, explaining that he meant no harm, hoping for a sign that they understood. But the temperature dropped, the door locked on its own, and the furniture rattled. The air grew heavy, as if unseen eyes bore into him. He tried to reason with them, even pulling up news of the captured criminal behind their suffering. Still, the room seethed with unrest. His words met silence. Desperation mounting, Chen Ge retrieved the worn and bloodstained missing person notice of Wang Qi, the man responsible. The moment he held it up, the tension shifted. The icy grip loosened. When he placed the paper between the dolls, a strange wind stirred despite the sealed room. The notice trembled, then tore itself apart. Tiny shreds vanished into the dolls' bodies. Then, silence. A soft vibration in his pocket broke the stillness. His phone revealed a new message: the hidden mission was complete. The lingering spirits had accepted his offering, and now, in return, they would keep the scenario in perfect condition. No mess. No disruptions. Just quiet, watchful order. He looked at the dolls again. The 3 larger ones sat in place. But the smallest one, a child, perhaps, leaned as if mid-escape. Not malicious, just curious. Like a kitten wandering too far. A strange warmth crept into Chen Ge's heart. Not all ghosts were cruel. He stood, the weight of tension lifting from his shoulders. These spirits weren't enemies. They were allies. Perfect ones. They needed no pay, no rest, and they excelled in evoking fear. As he stepped into the corridor, shadows curling along the walls, he smiled to himself. The haunted house had never felt so alive. And the game wasn't over yet. 3 visitors remained, medical university students who had entered with bravado, laughter, and half-joking dares. Now, they were separated, and silent. Each lost somewhere in the labyrinth of darkness and illusion. Chapter 35. The haunted house fell into a sudden silence. Inside one of the dim rooms, He-san and Lao Zhao crouched behind the door, breath held, every creak in the air a threat. They had heard screams earlier, classmates possibly taken out one by one. Now, only shadows remained. He-san, uneasy, peeked through a narrow crack in the door. The corridor was dark, unchanged, until he spotted something new. A worn ragdoll lay abandoned in the middle of the hall. He blinked. It hadn't been there before. Each time he looked, it seemed closer. Then, suddenly, it was gone. Far below, Chen Ge donned the persona of Dr. Skullcracker, bloodied coat, chained mallet, a mask stitched from horror. With deliberate steps, he roamed the haunted house, seeking those still hiding. A doll leaning outside a room caught his eye, silent, still, yet unmistakably deliberate. Feigning ignorance, he walked past, then doubled back using the blind spot in the corridor. As he crouched outside the door, the sounds inside betrayed tension. The chain's clink had vanished, and the silence had returned. Inside, Lao Zhao whispered confidence he didn't feel. Now was their chance to escape. He reasoned the killer wouldn't return upstairs so quickly. He-san leaned once more toward the door, prepared to confirm. But what met his gaze was not a corridor, nor a doll. It was a pair of eyes. Bloodshot. Inches from his own. He stumbled backward in terror. The door handle turned slowly. A towering figure, soaked in crimson, loomed in the doorway. Chen Ge, fully transformed, stood unmoving, his presence alone paralyzing. Lao Zhao, pale and cornered, retreated instinctively. But Chen Ge's quiet warning came too late. Something shifted in the wall behind him. Without sound, wallpaper peeled apart, revealing a ghostly woman embedded in the structure itself. Her lifeless face stared inches from his back. Lao Zhao crumpled instantly, terror overwhelming thought. With clinical precision, Chen Ge deactivated the scenario and began escorting them out. But a sudden sound cut through the silence. Glass shattered upstairs. A scream followed, raw and full of panic. Without hesitation, Chen Ge raced to the third floor. In one of the rooms, Brother Feng flailed with a chair against something unseen. He fought as if cornered by shadows that had weight. When exhaustion finally consumed him, Chen Ge stepped into the room, chair tossed aside. The fear in the boy's eyes was not staged. Whatever he had seen had reached past the haunted house and touched something deeper. The mirror had shattered. And something on the other side had looked back. Chapter 36. The silence that followed Brother Feng's scream was thick and unsettling. When he finally gathered enough breath to speak, he pointed a trembling finger toward the bathroom. The mirror, it had shattered. Chen Ge's face darkened. That mirror had been overlooked, he'd covered all others with black cloth, yet this one remained exposed. And now, it had drawn blood again. The cracked shards littered the floor like silent warnings, each reflecting slivers of unease. Staring into one of the fragments, Chen Ge muttered to himself that the threat lurking in the mirror had to be confronted, soon. Brother Feng, pale and trembling, recounted what happened. He had fled into the room, hiding from one of the haunted house's actors. All was quiet, until he began to feel summoned. A soft whisper, not quite a voice, led him to the bathroom. There, in the mirror, something called to him, not with words, but with a dreadful familiarity. He stood before the glass. His reflection stared back, but something was wrong. It was his face, yet not his. The eyes were vacant, the expression unfamiliar. His body moved without will, hands reaching to the mirror, as if to crawl in or out. He couldn't tell anymore. Then he saw it, a rag doll, reflected just behind him. Small, with a strange sewn beard. The sight of it snapped something loose in his mind. Panic surged through him. The spell cracked. Still, his body resisted until a distant scream broke the trance completely. He grabbed a chair and smashed the mirror. Later, Chen Ge retrieved the same doll from beneath the bed, its face dusty, yet oddly calm. It had a footprint across its body, as if stepped on in the struggle. Chen Ge cradled it like a guardian relic and told Brother Feng, "This little one saved you." Chen Ge looked at the doll with a quiet acknowledgement, his mind racing with the implications. In that moment, the air in the room grew colder, the shadows longer, as though the very walls of the haunted house were waiting for something. The doll remained still, its eyes unblinking. And somewhere in the depths of the house, behind another mirror, something watched, waiting for its next victim. Chapter 37. The haunted house trembled with silence as Chen Ge guided a shaken Brother Feng down the stairs. Moments earlier, the young man had faced a hidden spirit and barely escaped its grasp. Chen Ge saw something rare in him, resistance, the will to fight back. But fear had swallowed reason, and the chance for alliance slipped away. Alone again, Chen Ge sealed the haunted scenario, the lock clicking shut with finality. As he turned, the black phone in his pocket buzzed. Its screen lit up cold and bright. Monthly visitors have surpassed 100, and reputation has reached 60%. Conditions for expansion have been met. A chilling reward awaited, with a promise: after 3 expansions, the haunted house would transform into a maze of terror. Tempting, but the dark presence inside the mirror still lingered. One thing at a time. Stepping outside, he was met with a strange stillness. Visitors from the latest tour, students from the medical university, were scattered across the ground. Eyes wide, makeup streaked. Their expressions frozen in disbelief. Some wept silently, others stared into nothingness. 40 minutes had twisted them into shadows of their former selves. Spectators whispered, unsure if it was horror or art. Chen Ge barely noticed. His mind was elsewhere. Uncle Su appeared, concern etched on his face. The man scolded him in hushed tones. Another incident. Another cluster of terrified guests. Chen Ge defended his work. It was immersive, intense, yes, but safe. He had never crossed any line. Still, Uncle Su warned him. The haunted house was drawing attention, not all of it welcome. Accidents, misunderstandings, these could end it all. With a sigh, he reminded Chen Ge that his parents were gone, and there was no one left to shield him. Then came the real warning: the park itself was dying. A modern VR amusement center was nearing completion on the city's east side. With it would come crowds, tech, and spectacle. Their old park, outdated and forgotten, stood no chance. Even so, Chen Ge's resolve never wavered. He asked for help, not to escape, but to rebuild. He requested money to install surveillance throughout the haunted house. Not for show. For protection. Uncle Su hesitated, then agreed, though his voice was heavy with resignation. It's like throwing money into the sea, he murmured. But for Chen Ge, that sea still held something. Memories. Purpose. Maybe even something darker. He would expand the haunted house, not for fame, not for survival, but because it had chosen him. Chapter 38. The air in the old theme park felt heavier each passing year. Uncle Su, seasoned and weathered by time, spoke earnestly to Chen Ge. He didn't sugarcoat the decline, attractions abandoned not from safety concerns, but from draining finances. The underground parking lot, once bustling during the park's heyday, had fallen silent for over 3 years. Dust and disuse had reclaimed it. But while others saw ruins, Chen Ge saw opportunity. The forgotten underground space stirred something in him. It was remote, enclosed, untouched, an eerie chamber perfect for what he envisioned. A place to expand the haunted house. Though Uncle Su thought the idea unhinged, Chen Ge was undeterred. The darkness below would become part of his creation. Outside, the aftermath of the day's terrors still lingered. The medical students, brave in reputation but pale in complexion, huddled together, some shaken, others wounded not physically, but by fear itself. Their bodies trembled, their minds lingering on things they couldn't explain. One of them, He Feng, returned alone, trying to rationalize what he had seen. Logic strained against what his senses recalled. After exchanging contacts with the curious student, Chen Ge returned to his domain. He closed the haunted house early, drawing the iron gates shut and placing a sign that read, "Temporarily closed for maintenance." He changed out of his costume, the echo of the day still clinging to the walls. Inside the murder by midnight scenario, he began covering the mirrors. There were too many. The black cloth quickly ran out. The scenario was far too expansive. Without proper monitoring, it was dangerous, too dangerous to allow more visitors in. Not yet. Securing the area, he descended back to the lower level. Outside, only a few stragglers remained, the crowd now dispersed. He sent his assistant home, the work for the day finally done. The break room was quiet. He dropped onto the bed, the weight of fatigue overwhelming. His eyes shut before his mind could process anything more. The last thought lingering in the dark corners of his mind was not of rest, but of space, cold, vast, and waiting. The underground. Silent. Forgotten. Soon, it would breathe again. Chapter 39. The silence of midnight cloaked the haunted house, until a sharp, repetitive sound fractured the stillness. It pierced through the quiet like a saw grinding bone. In the dim break room, Chen Ge stirred, eyes opening to the glowing digits of 1:10 a.m. on his phone. The sound felt unnatural, too precise. Instinct warned him, this wasn't rats or burglars. Haunted houses didn't make noises like that on their own. Half awake, he reached for an iron hammer and flicked on a flashlight. Darkness draped the corridor outside. Shadows clung to the walls, heavy and unmoving. He hesitated before stepping out, gripping the old doll his parents left him, a quiet talisman of protection. The noise came from above. With cautious steps, Chen Ge climbed to the 3rd floor, stopping before the door of the murder by midnight scenario. The scent of mold lingered in the air, stronger than before. This place was changing, becoming more like the cursed Ping apartments it represented. Room doors stood half-closed, like mouths frozen mid-whisper. The sawing grew louder. It led him to a shut door. Fingers brushing the cold steel knob, he shoved it open. Inside the dim room crouched a figure in the corner, broad, solid, disturbingly familiar. Then it moved. The figure dropped its tool and dove into the mirror, vanishing like mist. Alone again, Chen Ge was left with the echo of his own breath and questions sharper than the glass shards on the ground. It had mimicked He Feng. But why? The mirror monster wasn't just escaping, it was watching, copying, learning. Among the debris, Chen Ge found 4 ragdolls. 3 were intact, save for Grime. The 4th, the father, was nearly decapitated, deep gashes across its fabric. A message. Vengeance. The monster was punishing the father for helping He Feng. The spirits were too weak to resist. And the creature, it had grown bold. Chen Ge pieced together a chilling theory. The mirror monster thrived on fear, illusion, and human vulnerability. Its strength wasn't in force, but in the mind. If he could draw it into the open, outside its reflective haven, perhaps its power would fade. But baiting it would require risk. Maybe even another human. He returned to the props room, dolls cradled in his arms. As he sewed their wounds, the plan began to form. He would need knowledge, allies, perhaps from the supernatural forums. The mirror no longer just reflected, it hunted. And it was time Chen Ge turned the hunt around. Chapter 40. The dim light from the monitor flickered across Chen Ge's face as he stared at his screen. His account, now highlighted in purple, marked the virality of the haunted video he had uploaded. Though thousands had watched and commented, their replies were either jokes or desperate folklore solutions. Suggestions ranged from raising animals with supposed spiritual protection to performing bizarre rituals. A few even suggested confronting the entity with reason, as if it could be reasoned with. Among them, only one suggestion held a sliver of potential, an old iron sword said to disturb otherworldly forces. But none of it felt concrete. Leaning back, Chen Ge let the weight of the silence press down on him. The mirror creature still lurked, unseen but undeniably present. No online myth or superstition could match the grim certainty offered by the black phone. He retrieved the device from his pocket. Its cold surface buzzed faintly with potential. He had come to understand its rules. Missions graded easy and normal supported his haunted house, but only nightmare missions offered something personal, something powerful enough to push back the shadows. But nightmare missions came with cost. And risk. As he hesitated, the black phone chimed. Daily missions had refreshed. 1 easy, 1 normal, 1 nightmare. Only one could be chosen. The easy one demanded equipment like sound detectors or surveillance cameras, tools he couldn't possibly set up in time. The normal one involved expansion plans that weren't yet possible. That left the nightmare. The description was simple, chilling. There are strange sounds coming from the bathroom at midnight. If you want to know why, follow my directions. It felt like a trap. Yet he couldn't afford to wait. A screeching sound echoed again above. Familiar. He rushed up the stairs to the 3rd floor, hammer in hand, the dread mounting. At the entrance to the murder by midnight scenario, shards of broken mirror lay scattered. Deep scratches marked the wooden door, as if something had been clawing its way out. Cold sweat trickled down his back. He imagined it now, the creature crawling through the halls while he slept, dragging mirror shards in the dark. He couldn't let it fester. Room by room, Chen Ge shattered every mirror on the third floor, the crash of breaking glass reverberating like a warning. This was no longer containment, this was war. The creature was evolving. It had once been confined to reflections. Now, it roamed. He locked the scenario's door behind him, jaw set. There was no turning back. Opening the black phone, he selected the nightmare mission. The screen pulsed with eerie light as the confirmation appeared. Are you sure you wish to accept the nightmare mission? After acceptance, unknown circumstances might occur. His thumb hovered for a second, then tapped. Yes. The room fell silent, the black phone glowing like an eye opening in the dark.